Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Red Donkey Projections. I'm Lucas. Unfortunately, Eric couldn't make it today, but today we are finally back. It's been a while, but today we'll be going through our very, very early predictions for the 2024 Senate elections. Now, we don't know too much yet, but these are very, very early predictions that we're going to try to make. If you guys remember back in 2021, actually, in January, we made 2022 Senate election predictions, and our initial predictions were actually almost on the dot. So we're going to see how this goes today. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with all these safe Senate seats first that don't need any explanations. But first, fun fact about me, the 2018 Senate elections, 2018 midterms, was the first ever midterm election that I followed, and the first election that I really, really looked into predictions into. So these seats are the Senate Class 1 seats. These seats are the exact same seats that were up for grabs in 2018. So we're going to be going through them and seeing where I place them. So North Dakota actually in 2018 was a flip state to Kevin Cramer, which was flipped from Heidi Heitkamp. So that one will be safe this time, given the trends of North Dakota. And the other thing I'm going to be considering is the fact that the 2024 presidential election will likely have an impact down the ballot. Utah will be safe Republican. We don't know yet if Mitt Romney is going to retire or get primaried, but looking like he's going to keep that as of now. Let's see. Missouri also was a flip state in 2018 to Josh Hawley from Claire McCaskill. This will be safe this time as well, especially given the down ballot. Indiana, I'm also going to put as safe. This is currently held by Mike Braun, first elected in 2018. He is retiring, and he will instead be running for governor of Indiana. But that will be safe. And I believe that might be it for Hawaii. That would be it for all the safe states. There, if I miss some, I'll go through them as we go down this list. So, lots of interesting states here. But the general idea that we have to consider is one, the 2024 presidential election is going to have impacts down ballot. And number two is that Democrats don't have a lot of pickup opportunities, while Republicans have a lot of pickup opportunities on this map. This map is definitely not favorable to the Democrats, as many safe Republican states have Democratic senators up for re-election in the Class 1 seats in 2024. So let's start with the likely seats. Let's start off with Virginia, actually. Recently, we heard that Tim Kaine will be running for re-election. That actually will probably make this a safe seat. To be quite honest here, he always wins by a pretty large margin every time. And Mark Warner, who had the seat up in 2020, actually also won by, I think, almost a safe margin. Considering that the presidential election is going to be at the same time, I expect this one to go safety. Even though Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, won the governor election in 2021, I think that the presidential election happening at the same time will contribute enough to pull Tim Kaine over the edge to win, likely in a safe margin. So the interesting state here that I left out was New Jersey. I left it out for a reason. Obviously, our when we considered this, this is if Bob Menendez is the nominee. We don't know yet for sure if he's going to be running again, but in the event he does, I can see this margin go below 15 points. If you guys recall, in 2018, Bob Menendez actually won by only 11 points against Bob Hugin, which is obviously an ever likely margin. And that was also in 2018, a year where we had lots of favorable trends throughout New Jersey, actually. New Jersey had 4 House seats flipped from blue to red, especially even in competitive districts like the 3rd with Andy Kim, or in districts like the 7th where Tom Malinowski beat Leonard Land. So keeping that all into account, if Menendez was only able to win by 11 points that year, I don't know how much more he can win in New Jersey in 2024. Of course, down ballot trends will help him, but I don't think it'll push him over 15. I think he'll still end up winning, but just in a likely margin. But I don't see New Jersey being necessarily competitive, but I don't see it being a safe state. So that's likely. Another state that we're going to put as likely for now is Texas. Again, we don't know too much yet about what Texas is going to look like because we're trying to consider how the down ballot trends in 2024 are going to favor whoever the Republican nominee is. but Texas is decently becoming more competitive recently. Of course, Beto and in the Senate, Beto didn't do that well in the governor election this year, but 2024, maybe it could go below 15 points. I think that's what we're thinking. Looking back to 2020, uh, Texas went Republican by 8 points and in the presidential election. And in the Senate election, I believe MJ Hagar won by lost by about 10 points. So that was also a likely range. So we're going to put this one as likely for now as our starting off prediction. I missed New Mexico. New Mexico, I believe, will end up going safe this time. In 2020, it was pretty close, and it was like a 6 point win by Ben Ray Lujan Grisham. But I think this time, I think it will go in the safe margin. But we'll revisit this definitely down the line if it becomes more competitive. Minnesota, I missed. I think I'm going to also put Minnesota as safe because Amy Klobuchar does win by very large margins in Minnesota every single time she runs, including in the very rural areas. So I expect her to win by a pretty decent margin, probably over 15%. Wisconsin is a tricky one because Tammy Baldwin is a very strong incumbent candidate. In 2018, she won by a very large margin. And this is considering a state that votes for Tammy Baldwin, one of the far left, one of the most liberal senators, and yet they also elect Ron Johnson, one of the most far right senators. So Wisconsin's very interesting. But I think that Tammy Baldwin will do pretty well, but I'm going to be cautious here and put it as likely because we don't know yet how the presidential election might impact this. Obviously, the state is way more competitive on the presidential side compared to the down ballot elections. In 2020, we saw Joe Biden win by only 0.6%, the closest state in the nation. Actually, no, that's a lie. It was not the closest state in the nation. But it was, I believe, the third closest state after with Georgia and Arizona. So it was still a very close election that could cause the Senate race to be somewhat more competitive. Let's go to Florida now. Florida, it looks like more and more it's going to be out of grabs for Republicans. I'm sorry, out of grabs for Democrats as we go down the line. In the past midterm election, Ron DeSantis won like 60-40, and Marco Rubio almost also won 60-40. So it's going to be, I think, a little closer on the presidential side because there is the down ballot from the presidential election. I'm going to put this one as likely for now because we don't know yet know what that is going to look like on the presidential level. I don't believe a county like Miami-Dade or I believe it was either Broward or Palm Beach. I don't remember which one flips Republican last year. I don't think they would flip Republican on a presidential level, so I'm going to put this one as likely Republican for now. Then to the state of Pennsylvania, I'm going to also put likely Democratic here. I was thinking about debating between putting this one as likely Democratic or likely or lean Democratic because Bob Casey is a pretty good incumbent. He won by a decent margin in 2018. Obviously, that was a favorable year for Democrats, but I think still in general, he would do a pretty good job in a presidential election. It's going to be a little more competitive because Republicans are going to turn out for whoever the Republican nominee is in the presidential election, but I think it's still going to be a pretty solid win for Bob Casey here. Michigan is an interesting state because Michigan is currently held by Debbie Stabenow, a very long-term incumbent Democrat. She recently did announce that she will be retiring from the Senate, and a surprise to a lot of people. So we don't yet know who the nominees are going to be, but I'm going to put this one as lead for now for two reasons. One is I think the Michigan Democratic Party does a pretty good job with getting their voters out. We saw that in 2022 when they won by very large margins throughout the state and in statewide elections. And I actually read a 538 article that it did a good job headlining this. There was a red wave in Florida, but a blue riptide in Michigan. So keeping that in mind, I think that they'll do a pretty good job in Michigan. Plus, I think Michigan is one of the bluest Rust Belt states, Rust Belt competitive states compared to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Michigan tends to be a little bit bluer. And the last thing I considered was the fact that the Republicans bench isn't too great in this state. Democrats have a lot of great candidates they can run, namely Jocelyn Benson, the state Secretary of State, and Representative Elisa Slotkin. Those are the two most talked about candidates. From the Democratic side, they're both solid candidates electorally. Republicans don't have a great bench there. They have John James is being talked about, but I don't think he's looking into it because he's still a freshman representative. And if they were to run someone like Tudor Dixon again, I don't think that would go down great either. Ultimately, in an election, another statewide election, because she lost at a pretty big margin to current Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So I'm going to put this one as lean Democratic for now. Oh, and I do want to note my apologies. These numbers don't match up with the actual Senate seats. I don't think Yapmis came up with a map yet for the 2024 Senate election, so I instead had a Senate Class 1 blank map. But I'll be keeping track, and I'll let you guys know what the final count is on paper of the number of pickups that we end up counting at the end of this. All right, the next step we're going to go to is Nevada. Nevada has currently Jackie Rosen as the incumbent. This election was very, very close last year in the midterm election. Jackie Rosen, I think, will do a pretty good job. She actually flipped the state to blue back in 2018 against Dean Heller. I also don't feel like Republicans have a great bench here either in Nevada. Brian Sandoval is a great candidate, but I don't believe he would run again for a Senate seat. I'm going to keep this one as lean for now because barring anything unexpected, let's say the generic thing happens in the presidential election, it's going to be relatively close, but I think it'll still end up being in a lean margin. I think Jackie Rosen will end up matching the presidential margin pretty closely. Maine will also be put as lean. I was debating between again lean and likely. We don't know yet what the presidential election results are going to be. This ended up clocking in at likely in the past presidential election. It could be that margin as well. I'm thinking 4 to 5 points win. Obviously, this doesn't have Maine doesn't have a Democratic senator as an independent senator, Angus King, who caucuses with the Democrats. I'll put that as Democrats for now. But I think Angus King is a pretty popular guy in Maine, so I think he'll win by a fairly decent margin. All right, now we're getting to the really competitive states now. 4 states left. Arizona, I'll start with Arizona. This is going to be a very interesting election because so far, Ruben Gallego, the Democratic representative from Arizona, has announced that he's going to challenge Kirsten Sinema for the Senate seat. What makes this very interesting is the fact that Kirsten Sinema no longer caucuses with the Democrats and caucuses as an independent. And we don't yet know if Kirsten Sinema will be planning on running for re-election. If she does, this election will get very, very interesting based on the margins because we don't know who she's going to get the votes from, whether it's going to be the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate. I am looking at the news. It does look like apparently Kari Lake or Blake Masters might actually run for the Senate seat. Both, as we recall from 2022, were not great candidates, losing both of their races. So I think this election will end up being tilt Democratic. For now, this is definitely going to vary because we need to know more information about if Kirsten Sinema runs for re-election or not. Looking at early polling data, it looks like it is very, very close if it's a three-way race between Gallego, Sinema, and Kari Lake. So that will be very interesting to keep an eye at. The next one I'm going to take a look at is the state of Montana. Montana's current senator is Jon Tester. He is a Democrat in Montana. It's a pretty Republican state. Not as Republican as some of the Deep South states, but still a fairly conservative state. Jon Tester could be facing Matt Rosendale, who is the current representative, I believe, from the 2nd District of Montana. He is fairly far right. He was actually one of the representatives who prevented initially Kevin McCarthy from being elected speaker. And he's not a great candidate, Matt Rosendale, compared to Jon Tester, who Jon Tester is actually a very good candidate. In 2018, he actually defeated, I want to say it was either Matt Rosendale or Greg Gianforte, one of those two candidates. He defeated them in 2018 by 3 points. So that goes to show that he can win in a fairly red state, even in an election. So I'm fairly cautious on this one because it is a presidential election year. The fact that there's a Republican candidate on the top of the ballot will cause some sort of down ballot advantage for the Republican candidates in the state of Montana. So I do expect a Republican to pull it off here. I'm going to keep it as lean Republican for now, but we need to wait and see exactly for more data, especially thinking about Matt Rosendale being the candidate and him not being a great Republican candidate. It really could end up going in favor of Jon Tester, especially considering how good of a candidate he is. So this is the first Republican pickup. Ohio is a very interesting one too. Ohio is a recently more conservative state. I think I'm going to start this one off as a flat toss-up. if anything, it would be advantage to the slight advantage to the Republican candidate. But Sherrod Brown is also a very, very good candidate. In 2018, he won by a whopping 8 points in the state of Ohio, a state that has been trending more and more Republican uh as the years have continued. As you all might recall, Trump won the state by 8 points actually, in 2016 and in 2020 as well. So considering that, those down ballot trends might not be good for Sherrod Brown because that would help the Republican candidate in a presidential election year. However, Sherrod Brown being a good candidate has to take that into account, and we're going to keep this one as toss up. His populist message did seem to work in 2018, although it didn't work too great in 2020 for Tim Ryan. So this is going to be one to watch. I'll keep it as toss up. And finally, the state of West Virginia, probably one of the most interesting states where the current Democratic Senator, Joe Manchin, is trying to win re-election in a state that Donald Trump won by 43 points. So taking that into account, it's going to be very, very difficult for Joe Manchin to win re-election, even though he's doing the best he can to show a moderate record with the Biden administration and in Congress. It's still going to be very, very hard for him to win re-election in such a red state and in a presidential election year. As a result, I'm putting this one as a likely Republican, and I heard that Jim Justice might be running for the Senate in this state. He would have a lot of crossover appeal. He's a pretty decent candidate. So overall, I think that this one is going to turn Republican. And I believe, if I did the math correctly, that should be 2 Republican pickups, which would effectively flip the Senate to the Republicans. As I noted earlier, it's a very tough map for the Democrats. It's definitely doable for them to win, but it is very hard on paper to see a victory in such red states. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. If you like our content, please subscribe. And we'll see you in our next episode tomorrow. See ya.